Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to another video. I've got a special guest with you today, Gray Crawford. So, before we introduce Gray, the reason he's here is that Gray contributed an article to a astrology publication that I write every year, and that is the Wellbeing Astrology 2025. So, it's Australian magazine. We get a selection of fabulous writers every year to contribute articles, and Gray was one of those people again. So thank you, Gray, for your contribution this year. So can you please maybe introduce yourself to my audience here on YouTube? Because hopefully everyone knows you, but chances are some of you may not. So take it
Yeah, I'm an
away.
astrologer here in the United States. I do a lot of natal consultations and I love working with people on natal consults. It's one of the big parts of my practice. I do horary astrology also. My website's graycrawford.net. I do write on that. I have a Patreon community connected through that too that has different tiers and monthly classes going on there all the time. And very recently, I've gotten YouTube going. So I'm starting to make YouTube videos and I'm going to be putting more energy there as we
Excellent.
head towards this Neptune and Aries period. We're going to be
Yeah.
talking about, yeah.
Awesome. I'll be sure to put a link to your channel and all of that in the notes below. So I was thinking before we got on this call, Gray, we've been friends for a while now, haven't we? So
Yeah.
we've been living through a few of these big transits, both being Gemini rising. So um, Gray wrote about Neptune in Aries in this edition. So while this magazine is an Australian publication, very soon, and hopefully by the time I put this video online, you'll be able to get a digital copy of that. So for the international viewers who are really curious about some of the articles and of course the horoscopes, which been written by yours truly. So we've got Gary Caton, of course, yourself, Gray, Alex Trenoweth, Adam Allenbass, Laura Matsu, and many more. So some of the astrologers may be new to you, and some of them you know and love already. So tell us about Neptune and Aries. I mean, 2025 is a massive, massive year. So we'll probably go in a lot of directions, being two Gemini risings getting together. But tell us about Neptune and Aries and maybe what we can expect with this sort of combination of, moving from that water to fire for a period in 2025.
Yeah. I mean, it's really extraordinary. It's such a big deal. And I think people are talking about Neptune and Aries, but I feel like it's sort of this under the radar huge transit that's coming in that is not getting quite as much attention as everything else. I'm very aware of it because it's been going over my Sun and Jupiter right now, because my Jupiter is like right at the very, very end of Pisces, right at that zero Aries point. So Neptune leaving Pisces to enter Aries, especially crossing over that zero Aries point that we can, talk a little bit more about. That alone is just, it's such a big deal. I get why everyone's very excited about Uranus and Gemini. That's also a really big deal. There's the whole Jupiter Saturn cycle that's playing out, Jupiter changing signs, Pluto changing signs. But Neptune is a really important influence in astrology. And I feel like a lot of times it gets classified by people nowadays, especially it seems like it's just being about illusion and deception and addiction. Like it gets portrayed very, very negatively, and it definitely has really tricky sides to it.
Yeah.
And it is very much about our perception of reality, and our perception of reality is filled with illusions, perhaps more than ever in this world that
For
we're
sure.
in now.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah, to sort of talk about what you were mentioning, obviously everyone's talking about Uranus and Gemini, and that feels kind of obvious, right? Then we have Pluto and Aquarius. Well, we've been dancing with that now for, 18 months, and at this point in time, it's here to stay. Whereas Neptune and Aries is a very different energy. And
It's
I
very
think for a
different.
lot of people, it's okay, how do we make that work. Pisces, Neptune and Pisces almost in of itself is kind of one and the same, even though I personally don't see Neptune as the ruler of Pisces. But then, how for a lot of people who are particularly newer to astrology, I think it's how do we put this archetype of Neptune into the fire of Aries? And so, how can we look at that from perhaps an archetypical perspective from your point of
Hmm.
view?
Yeah, and to your point, the astrology field has just flooded and became so big during the transit of Neptune and
Yeah.
Pisces, which we kind of expected. I feel like back then that was something a lot of people did think would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people did think that astrological magic would also come back, but it's pretty remarkable how huge all of that has been. I mean,
Especially for you too.
it's honestly exceeded my expectations. Yeah,
Mm.
it's like it's because for it to become so popular. I mean, it wasn't even that long ago that people doing astrological magic was pretty uncommon, not as common as it is today amongst astrologers. And that's all happened with Neptune and Pisces. And you're right, people associate Neptune with Pisces. In the 20th century, people started talking about Pisces being the sign of Neptune. But even, just removing that from the the situation with Pisces and Neptune, there's a lot of affinity between them. Pisces is that deep, nocturnal water sign, home of Jupiter, the exaltation of Venus. It is a very dreamy, deep, internal, devotional. There is a spiritual, devotional quality to Pisces, and Neptune being about the other world and the numinous and the unitive and dissolving things and bringing
This
about
all in one,
disillusionings. Yeah,
all in one, or all is one, I should say, kind of energy to it.
yeah, yeah. It can sweep you up into
Mm.
these larger movements, and you lose a sense of your identity because you're merging with either something spiritual or some group, something very idealistic,
Collective
ideals.
identities and things of that
Yeah.
nature. Yeah, yeah.
And we've seen it's coincided. Social media was already obviously going on before Neptune came into Pisces. It was very Neptune and Aquarius, but it's just gotten so much bigger in that
Did
time period.
Instagram come about roughly with Neptune and Aries, though? I have a feeling it did, or at least in
Hmm.
Australia, because I remember
Neptune and
it was
Pisces.
about
Yeah.
2013, 12,
That one
13, when
that one I don't remember.
Instagram came, the
'Cause I was
filter
late to
and
Inst
the,
Yeah, I was
yeah.
late to Instagram. I didn't get on that right away, but you're right that it was definitely more
It was
in
a
that
photo
Neptune and Pisces
sharing app
zone.
essentially in
Yeah.
the beginning, wasn't
Hmm.
it? I remember was 2013, and one place where I used to train in the gym, they were talking about trying to get, what's this Instagram? Should we get on this social media? Because back then it was just all about Facebook. And then I thought,
Hmm.
why would you just like share photos? It just felt really weird. I didn't get onto it personally. I think it was whenever Jupiter was in Libra, maybe 2015, 16, perhaps.
Hmm.
And I just sort of had this phase. I just want to look at nice things. But now even that's morphed and changed and become
Oh yeah.
very, very different. So yeah, that whole, the filter, the selfie was sort of birthed in Uranus and Aries, but then what you see on an Instagram photograph is often very different to real life. So there's that sort of, as you were saying, that being swept up in things, not sure what's real, or maybe very devotional, very compassionate, and almost sometimes in the sense of seeing Neptune and Pisces, perhaps from its opposite, being Virgo, very discerning and sort of critical and nitpicky. This journey of Neptune and Aries, in Pisces has just been
Pisces, yeah.
anything but like, oh, it doesn't matter what you tell us, we're just going to believe whatever we want to believe anyway, or whatever we're kind of caught up or
Right.
swept up in. So as Neptune moves into Aries, what are your thoughts around how this is going to be a very stark and perhaps an abrupt contrast to what the reality is?
Well, one of the things that really complexifies the situation is the fact that Saturn is trailing behind
Hmm.
Neptune and they're coming to the end of a cycle and they're going to start coming together pretty much as soon as Neptune goes into Aries. But there'll be a little bit of a break between like the end of March and kind of like end of May where Neptune's in there and Saturn hasn't
Yeah.
come in yet.
Yeah, so
But
I'm just speaking
yeah.
from the top of my head now, so I may not be quite right.
Hmm.
Neptune comes into Aries roughly March 30, maybe April 1, potentially
Think
around
a
that,
little bit before that, but that's
is it?
basically right. Yeah.
And then to
Yeah.
about October 22-ish.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
But
That's
then
right for
but then
sure.
Saturn's from about May to September, and I can't remember
Yeah.
those dates.
Towards the end of May. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we do have a
Yeah.
bit of time where we do have Saturn in Pisces still, and then
There
sort
is.
of that
There's a
pure
little
shot
bit.
of Neptune.
There
So,
is there. Yeah.
mm,
And it's interesting because it's right around the Aries equinox that right after that, I think about a week or so, within a week of that Aries equinox, Neptune goes in. It basically stays in all the way past the Libra equinox, but doesn't get too far past
mm,
that Libra equinox. So that's, a big chunk of the year that Neptune's in Aries. And I guess I'll hold off on the Saturn Neptune part and just talk about Neptune in Aries. So with that deep, dreaming and I mean Neptune in Pisces is probably one of the most, if not the most extreme placements for Neptune, just to really be open to so many different influences and synthesizing so many things together
yeah,
and really opening up this bigger vision. And I think as this is something that will connect to Neptune in Aries. When I was talking about Neptune being about illusion, and sure it is, and sure there's lots of wild conspiracy theories out there. But there's also a thing about, for example, something like magic, where that can get tricky too. Like what's really someone's making something up versus what's
mm.
actual magic. There is
Are you
actual
being sort of
magic.
spiritually hoodwinked in a sense?
Yeah, are you being,
Yeah,
but there also is magic. There is much more beyond reality than the very limited perceptions people are living within. And
yeah,
especially in this age, which is the context of this, of very controlled information, very manipulated information. There's, limited perception. Neptune opens things up to everything beyond that. And so there's actually deeper truths that Neptune does put us in touch with, but it's a tricky thing.
mm,
Um, with Aries, there's just going to be, I think, a real surge. And I think people in their minds think about Pisces being very spiritual because that's just an image I think people have in their minds about Pisces and being watery and that kind of quality. But fire is, traditionally really the most spiritual element. It rises up to the summit. It's all about divine inspiration. You can really get swept up, and Neptune and Aries. Then I think will be very spiritual, incredibly idealistic, and really even to a sense of like wildfires being set off
yeah.
and people being really swept up in their ideals.
Sort
And
of
that could involve
Aries and the
spirit.
head, like that hedonistic,
Yeah, it's the head.
yeah,
Hmm.
maybe,
It's the exaltation of the sun.
yeah,
I mean, it's incredibly actually oracular. I mean, you think about the spiritual side of the sun. I think a lot of people focus on Mars and Aries, which is true, but I mean, Mars can be that spiritual devotion to something
mm,
in this martial way. And so I think whereas everything is so open with Pisces, one thing it makes me think about is just this real focus and things being really thrust. And,
mm,
out of all the things you've possibly even before, something gets much more focalized and moving much faster.
yeah,
And I think there'll need to be awareness of being swept up in something because there's a lot of signs of cycles coming through that have correlated with revolutions and different big collective
yeah,
movements that really sweep people up. And a lot of ideology and idealism is all part of that. So I think
yeah,
there's going to be more of a fiery surge like that and a
mm,
quickening, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's this idea of perhaps maybe a spiritual awakening of sorts. And then
Hmm.
when somebody goes through that process, they can get quite dogmatic or
They can get very dogmatic.
emboldened
Yes.
and
Hmm.
almost uh, this
Inflated.
yeah, for sure. And the exaltation of the sun. And I think I like how you often bring that up in the Neptune in Aries picture, because when you think about the sun being the sort of the fulcrum of which everything else orbits. And so, in this sort of spiritual, philosophical, magical, weird phase that we've been in, it's hard to find the center when everything's sort of been discombobulated and a lack of containment. I'm wondering with Neptune and Aries, and of course, there's that Saturn dynamic that is, we're trying not to kind of complicate the things here, but this idea that when everything else is changing and quickening, as you said, that we have to hold our place in the center of it all. And that can
Yeah,
help
that's going to
us,
be very important for sure.
yeah, and not kind of get swept up in those fires or that idea with Aries, it can be very impulsive.
Yeah, I mean, in the article I wrote, when I was trying to think of a more simple image for people, and I one of the comparisons I made was like Neptune and Pisces sort of being at the beach, and you're just in this other liminal place, and where you can really open up to this transcendent perspective. But that's not going to be, Neptune and Aries is not that. It's much more about this movement. And with Saturn coming in there with Neptune, we can't really separate that out because it's only a little bit that we get Neptune in Aries. Then by the end of May, Saturn comes into Aries this next year. They basically both station in July, right as Uranus pops into to Gemini,
Hmm.
like right in the middle of them both stationing in
Yeah.
that first week or so, first couple weeks of July, that all happens, and they get very close together. I believe it's like something like 13 arc
13.
minutes. It is so close to an
I mean,
exact conjunction.
I'm calling it a conjunction. I think with the big
Yeah,
movers occupying the
yeah,
same degree is more than a conjunction. We're
yeah.
certainly
And
going to
that
get a
train,
red hot taste of what it's going to be like.
oh yeah, and that transition from Pisces to Aries is a very difficult transition. There's in some ways not a lot of common ground, but there is in the sense of like Mars is, especially like if you look at like the bounds and even like decans and things. I guess not the end of the of Pisces is not actually the bounds of Mars. Now that I'm actually thinking about what I just said, it's there is a bounds of Mars towards
Mm,
the end of Pisces that then goes to Saturn before it goes
mm,
on. But and that's actually not the bounds of Mars either. So just forget that one. But the
scrap that.
decans, yeah,
Yeah, the decan is, yeah,
the
yeah,
decans does transition
yeah.
over. And there is a quality though that the Pisces with that last decan that is Mars, but also being water and Mars's triplicity. There is a martial, more of a martial kind of affinity with Pisces, and people always talk about. But there's no common ground otherwise. Water and fire. Water symbolically, is cold and wet. Fire, hot and dry. And that 0 point,
Mm,
it's not just because we think a lot of times about Aries being the beginning of the zodiac. It's the Aries point. It's that point where when the sun enters that point, it's equal light and day all around the earth. I
yeah.
know southern hemisphere, it's not the spring equinox, but that dominant northern hemisphere
Mm.
perspective, it is the spring equinox and the sun
I'm not
rising in,
racist against the hemispheres.
yeah, the sun rising in declination here. From our perspective, it's rising up to northern declination and its greatest height at the summer solstice.
Mm,
And that declination and projecting that celestial equator out
yeah.
um, is really important about this. And Saturn and Neptune, they're not going to get to like zero declination this year. It's more like in 2026, but they're also that's something else going on that they're coming up to cross over the celestial equator as they're also hitting that zero Aries. And that 0 point of Aries is just known in astrology as things hit that point. I mean, any of the cardinal signs, but because that Aries point has that general like increasing,
Mm,
it does have a north node in the terms of increase type of symbolism.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so it's just you can't possibly have anything more amplified to have something come together at that first degree of Aries.
Mm.
I think the only other I didn't realize there was one at first. I was trying to look. I didn't, and then I heard S.J. Anderson talk about. I think it's 4361, and then I realized, oh, I didn't look far enough back to find that one. So that was the last time. There hasn't been one Saturn Neptune coming together since that time.
Oh,
It's
wow.
incredibly unusual. We
Mm.
have, I mean, it's and to have that happen with Uranus coming into Gemini to sextile it and Pluto and Aquarius sextiling it, it's so powerful. And the Saturn Neptune cycle very consistently goes with like changes in perception of collective reality. And it can go with people awakening up. It can also get people swept up into things, you know. So,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
what you said about the groundedness, that's going to be really important to find your center and really that's the main advice I've been trying to put out with people this year is just to really focus in on your passions and your purpose and your dream and then just go for it. Just get really focused on it, but you need to get clear about what that really is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That sort of stark reality of, the transition from Pisces, which is sort of almost a drunk, dazed, confused, and almost going into this astro rehab where everything's dry and stark and
Hmm.
almost exceptionally raw, particularly being at that 0 point of Aries. And so it might be for some people this great awakening and all of the sort of impetus to act when you finally see something for what it is, or now I know. And that might be a sort of religious, spiritual, astrological, magical, what, choose your choose your avenue. But there is that sense of maybe been thinking about Saturn and Neptune being so close
Mm,
together in Pisces for a long time, and the idea of just sort of clinging to a chunk of wood in the middle of the ocean, and then, finally being sort of the tide washing us up onto dry land. Okay, so now what are
mm,
you going to do? Right. So what are you going to do with, with what inspires you? What dreams are you going to commit to? And perhaps really commit to that dream. It's a bit hard to
yeah.
really get that traction in Pisces, whereas in Aries, it's kind of, moving ahead, focusing on action and desire. And particularly, I always like how you return it back to the exaltation of the sun. What is meaning and purposeful for
Mm,
you? If you're just sort of wasting time, that's not going to work for you. This is kind of taking the ram by the horns in a sense and charging forward in some way that's really a passion point for you. So I guess we have the North Node in Aries now. So there is that stimulation or that action or that amplification of your Aries house. And then, of course, in 2025, that's going to be, Neptuned up and Saturned up at the same time. And so, whatever has kind of been maybe, amplified or expanded in some way or exaggerated a little bit, churned up, it's almost okay, let's do something with this. Saturn and Neptune can in Aries, I think, can help people get a lot of things done if you focus and use that energy to sort of fuel the flames or fuel your fire, and not just be a you don't want to be a flash in the pan with this, which is sometimes what Aries can get things
that's true
started,
too. Yep.
can get
That's
things
something
started.
else that can happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't want to burn out. And it's, I guess, maybe what do you think about the fact that we just get I don't want to say dip our toes in the water, maybe like put our fingers on the stovetop for a little bit
Yeah.
in 2025. This idea that we get a little bit of a taste test of what this
Hmm.
transit's going to be like. How would you perhaps guide or help people in
Yeah.
how they can work with that? We're just getting the flavors of this next year. It doesn't settle in really until 2026.
Yeah. So I guess one way to think about that would be maybe if you've already had experiences with Pluto and Aquarius,
Hmm.
because we've had that happen where it's gone in and come back. And so eh, that is, I think, again, the Neptune is going to be, I think, a lot more powerful than people realize. It's
I
going to
agree.
be. Pluto gets all the airplay, but I wouldn't put it over Neptune actually. And so things are going to get going, but we're going to come back. And I
Yeah,
think one thing I've been wondering about is the fact that they get so close because it's really like a conjunction. It's going to feel like a conjunction because it doesn't, there's 13 arc minutes. I almost wonder with a lot of things. And again, think about Neptune. It can be incredibly powerful, and you can actually go to a deeper truth, a much more bigger vision of what reality is. But you can also get caught up in paranoia, in fantasy, in your imagination, in your fears. And so I do wonder about all the things going on in the world and things looking like they might go a certain way in various
mm,
ways that don't quite end up, that doesn't quite happen because they don't actually quite come
mm,
together. That's one thing I've wondered about how that might go with just some big current events. And
yeah.
whatever it is, something's going to get set off in the, basically, especially May, June, July, August, September. But, Neptune's also there in March and October. But you are going to come back to Pisces for a little bit.
Mm,
And then in 2026, they finally come together in February. So there is that sort of unfinished business in Pisces where I think, especially when you're talking about the dream, is to get that sense of what that is and, taking action on it. But then as it comes back to Pisces, perhaps that's where things need to kind of let things kind of settle again and
marinate a bit.
dissolve and
Mm.
then get a better sense of, what that's going to be going forward.
Yeah, I
One
think
thing,
that's really
yeah.
important to mention because sometimes the key with a Neptune transit is you almost are unaware of it until it's happened. And you look back
Oh yeah.
and then you sort of realize, what was I doing in that job or in that relationship or why was I losing all my money or whatever house it is for you, it is going to make you, sometimes you just realize you're vague, fatigued, confused, or maybe pouring a whole lot of energy into something. And then you look back and you go, oh, that was my Neptune transit. So, we might sort
Yeah.
of feel that a little bit next year as Neptune goes in and out of houses. We might get more awareness of
Mm-hmm.
what the Pisces story was for us. And then we kind of return to
Hmm.
that, wrap it up, and then move into the next phase. So,
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
people who are watching, I just want to uh, in 2025, Neptune's going to move from 27 Pisces through to 2 Aries. So if you've got late
Mm-hmm.
mutables or very early cardinals, you're going to have this Neptune transit in 2025. I mean, you would have had a bit of the late mutable energy already. Lucky me, I get a bit of it all. So I feel like I'm in a Neptune realm right now. So I'm really excited about having a different version of Neptune in 2025. I think it is really about, passion and desire
Mm-hmm.
and drive.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's one thing to have hopes, dreams, and wishes and, all of that kind of stuff, wing and a prayer, but what are you going to do about those?
Yeah, I mean Neptune, I think one of the reasons it gets discounted, and like again, people always be like, oh, you're being led astray by illusions, but like humans are just so full of illusion, and it's just like this. Neptune's actually such an important thing, and the disillusionment that we go through with Neptune is actually so important. That's what brings us into deeper truth, and it can be that underlying thing that's motivating you and leading you to
Yeah.
where you're going. And again, it's going to be like, can't stress enough, like you're saying, there's going to be so much more traction and energy and ability to really go after something with the switch. I think right now, as you and I are talking right now, it's fascinating because Mars is stationing retrograde, which everyone's talking about, but Neptune's actually stationing direct at the same time. And there's something fascinating to me about that because Neptune's just going straight for Mars's sign. And
Hmm.
I think actually this Mars retrograde and Leo and getting in touch with that fire quality right now, people listening to this in this period, it's going to be really important. And there's actually going to be a bit of a connection with how you're working with that fire element that will end up being connected later on. I'd say the other thing you brought this up earlier, and I wanted to come back to it, is you mentioned people getting dogmatic and inflated. Well, I said inflated, but it's the same thing. That is a problem with Saturn Neptune.
Yeah.
We can have religious fundamentalism, dogmatism, that's classic Saturn Neptune. And
Hmm.
I think that is going to be, again, accentuated. It's like the person that gets this, like you were saying, that spiritual idea, and then they start telling everybody, and they get really inflated and dogmatic and start, you know, thinking they're higher than other people, like full in your head. So that's the other part is to make sure we're bringing that back down and really, directing it more from our center, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the religious component is definitely going to be something to watch
Hmm.
for this transit for sure. So, Gray, thank you for sharing. We could really talk about Neptune in Aries and all other
Yeah.
things for a long time. It's a really juicy transit. We've got, 14 years of it,
Yeah, that's the other
thereabouts.
amazing thing.
Yeah,
14
yeah.
years, yeah.
Um, and yeah, so there's definitely going to be one area of life that is going to um be lit up by these movements. And I think what I'm excited, I mean, obviously we're in a Neptune in a fire sign generation. So for
Yes.
us, yeah. So I mean, I don't know about you personally, but if I'm not inspired and actually lit up by something, I'm bored. And
Right.
astrology was really the only thing that ever held my attention. So
Hmm.
if you are really wanting to have something that really stokes your fires, something that you can chew on, something you can really dive into in a magical and meaningful way, I think Neptune and Aries has so much going for it. Neptune and Pisces it's wonderful in its own way, but it's not getting much done. It's just trying all the things and marinating in all the things and getting swept away in all the things. And now it's like, okay, what am I going to do about what I've been, um, swept up in for the last, however many years it's been in Pisces now. And I think
Hmm.
2025 is the perfect timeline to be because Neptune dances across these two houses for
Hmm.
us all. And it's like, okay, how do we kind of go into the water and the fire and make that transition work for us in terms of really having a red hot go of a dream or something um, magical in our lives. I mean, I have a fairly Neptune-ish chart, so I just find the best anecdote for working with it is to not resist it and just double down on the ridiculousness of what Neptune can bring. Just create something magical, fantasy out of it, go beyond the realms of what's practical or even real, and go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you brought up the Neptune and Sagittarius generation. So those that might be listening to that have that, I mean, there is a lot of affinity. That is the fire. That's what a fire
Yeah.
Neptune quality is like for sure. So there's a definite resonance there.
Yeah, I think that's what I like about it. It's this idea of being really inspired by something. That spark of imagination and creation is going to be really potent in the next little bit. Um, I hope I've shared my level of excitement. I'm looking forward to it. So great. Tell the people where they can find you. So you said you do reading. So if you're looking for
Hmm.
some um, really insightful guidance from Gray. The website is down below. Do you have any classes or anything that you want to tell people that you've got coming up?
I don't have any. There is a talk I'm giving for a Astrology Association online that people can check out on my site on December 13th. I'm not sure when this is coming out, if that'll really be
I think
relevant.
it will be relevant. Yeah, I'll be putting it.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
so
actually a different one. Speaking of Neptune, I'm giving a talk on Ceres, which I've never done before,
okay.
but I have my own personal interest in Ceres. It's not a traditional planet, but if people are interested in Ceres and how she's actually now a dwarf planet, not just an
Oh, okay.
asteroid, you can
Mm.
come to that talk. But yeah, I am going to be doing some, I don't have any other classes right now planned, but if you go to graycrawford.net, you can subscribe to my site there, and I'll be announcing classes there. Definitely, if you want to talk about the astrology of the next year, I'd definitely love to do a consult. So you can contact me there too. The information's there to schedule that kind of thing.
Awesome. And are you still doing your new and full moon write-ups?
Yep, I always
Okay.
write about the new moon and full
Okay,
moon,
great.
and that's still going there. And otherwise, I'm moving a lot more into getting YouTube videos going. So I'll be
Great.
doing more of that. I'm just getting the hang of that right now, but that's going to be part of this whole Neptune going
Neptune.
back and forth
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, there's a lot of like kind of primordial, chaotic formlessness with this Pisces Aries. So, just following what your passion is and you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's certainly what I'm doing with the YouTube videos right now.
Well, it's the best way to do anything
Yeah.
is just to
Yeah.
start and figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so great to catch up with you, Gray. And I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. You've got a little bit more food for thought as to what Neptune and Aries will mean for all of us over the next 14 or so years. So thanks for joining me, Gray.
Yeah. Thank
All
you.
right. Take care, everyone. See you in the next video.